welcome to Oakville Matters. Today we're talking about greening our planet, greening our town. All across the province of Ontario, all across Oakville, the emerald ash tree borer has been ripping out our ash tree forests, and that's caused a problem that's very expensive. The trees are dangerous if we leave them alone because they might fall and hurt somebody. We've spent a lot of money trying to save the big ones and remove the dangerous ones. But all of that adds up to yet another reason to continue to grow our urban forest tree canopy, which is very important to the town of Oakville. We have one of the highest amounts of urban forest tree canopy in the country, and certainly in the GTA. And we mean to grow that to the 40% level that's recommended by the forest experts. And with me today to talk about the many things that we're trying to do to get there are Giuliana Casimirri, who is the Executive Director of Oakville Green, and my old friend Cathy Kavassalis. Cathy and I were neighbors for many years, and she is not only a stalwart member of the Oakville Horticultural Club, she's also, I think I'm entitled to say, a master gardener. And we have McHaffie, and Mara is in charge of the new town-backed Oakville Green program called Backyard Tree Planting. And one of the people in my office was tweeting yesterday how excited she is that on Saturday she's getting a backyard consultation on planting a tree to do her part. Mara, let's start with you. Explain how this works, will you?
Okay, sure. So what happens is anybody who's interested can sign up online at yourleaf.org. And then our next step is that we book a consultation with them. So an arborist comes right out to their yard. They assess their soil, their sunlight, how much space they have in the yard, and they also talk with them about what they're looking for in a tree, you know, how they use the yard, what size they're looking at. And then they'll recommend species that will work well in their yard, that are going to thrive and survive. And they'll also recommend planting locations that are going to make sure that the tree has a lot of room to grow and isn't going to conflict with anything in the future. And then after that, we come back in our spring planting season, which runs from April to June, and we deliver and plant the tree for them. So it's a really easy process. It helps homeowners who maybe don't have enough knowledge to want to plant a tree themselves. And there's also a do-it-yourself option for those who are comfortable with planting, that will just deliver the tree for them and they can plant as well.
So now, as I understand it, you also help guide people to make sure they choose a tree that's appropriate to our climate and our geography.
Absolutely.
What I think native tree species, yep, but appropriate in any case. And I know that Cathy, you've always preached the importance of the right plant for the right spot. How do people respond to that if their heart is set on some ornamental tree they read about somewhere, but you're there to tell them, well, that really won't work? Have you? Because you did this last year, right? So you already have some. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think part of the issue is maybe that people don't realize how many great native species we have that will thrive well in the conditions. So
they're happy to learn that there is a native alternative?
Absolutely. There are often alternatives, and we talk with them about what it is that they like about maybe those ornamental or non-native species, and then we can recommend species that are going to be similar and provide those similar functions, but also contribute to our native biodiversity. And also when we tell them things like, this native species is maybe better suited to the conditions, so that's going to mean it's more likely to survive. It might be lower maintenance than some of those other non-native species, and they're usually pretty happy to hear about that too.
Yeah. Now, Cathy, there's a tree I'm very curious about. The planter tree, is that the proper name for it?
Maybe the plane tree? P-L-A-N-E?
Well, I thought it was P-L-A-N-A-R, but it has a very unusual bark.
That would be the plane tree.
The plane tree.
Platanus occidentalis is our native species, is the European species, and Americana is the native species.
So I've seen them, I think.
We have a native plane tree, but it lives in lowlands where there's a lot of moisture. it has met up with the European plane tree, and they've made a baby, a hybrid, which we call the London plane tree. That London plane tree is the one that has the beautiful spackled bark, and it copes very well with urban pollution. So it's not a native, but it's going to be a native 1,000 years from now. That is, it's here to stay. So yes, it's a combined species.
So is it an accepted tree, so to speak?
This is a difficult question. If you're a purist in terms of natives, no, but it does serve ecosystem functions. So it's still sequestering carbon, it's still helping to, stabilize soil and we're taking pollutants out of the air. So it is doing many things that are important. And in some locations, it may be a tree that's appropriate. But as Mara has said, there are certainly many, many native species that would be equally good and just as attractive. So we have, say, 50 species, native species indigenous to Halton region, that are small trees, that is under 25 meters in height, and they would fit in almost any backyard. And then there are, of course, large stature trees like the big sugar maples and oaks that would go as well. So it depends on the sort of the function that you want for the trees, and trees can serve many purposes, and we need to sort of think about those, all the benefits that trees can provide us.
So, Casimirri, what's the hottest thing in Oakville Greens tree planting inventory or army? What's keeping you up at night?
Well, we've got lots going on, so it's definitely keeping us busy. That's not really keeping us up at night. We've got a lot of great work going on in the community, so we're really happy about that. Obviously, our backyard tree planting program is a new undertaking, a new initiative with LEAF, and we're really pleased to be able to bring that to Oakville. Before it was previously in Toronto, in York Region, not in Oakville. So that's a new program, and happy to have the town of Oakville support that as well, to carry it on at least for 2018. And we're continuing our community tree plantings. We have all our events listed on our website, so we've got things happening at Arborview Park, Valley Ridge Park, Clearview. We'll be all over Oakville this spring and into June with lots of those kinds of events.
The nice folks at LEAF would probably appreciate if we explained who they are, so that they get a little more credit for what they're doing here.
Yeah, so our partner in the backyard tree planting program is LEAF, and their acronym stands for Local Enhancement and Appreciation of Forests. And they're a Toronto-based NGO, and they've been doing a backyard tree planting program for 16 years. So they're really, we thought if we want to, bringing it to Oakville, our purpose was that we know that we cannot achieve that 40% tree canopy cover on public land alone, and the municipality can't do it alone. We need to do it on private property. That's what our data is telling us, that's where the tree planting space is. And that's why we thought we need to encourage homeowners. We want to make it as easy as possible. The program is subsidized. We're fortunate to have the Ontario Trillium Foundation sponsor our pilot for the first year. So we want to just make it as easy as possible for a homeowner to say, yeah, I want a tree. I've been thinking about a tree. I don't know how to do it myself, and let's bring in LEAF, and they're the experts, and they're going to make sure it's the right tree in the right place. We have all those great biodiversity functions and all the other ecosystem benefits that come with that. So the ordering and all the application is through the LEAF website for now. It's www.leaf.org, I believe, is that right? yourleaf.org, and that's where all the applications are processed for the whole program.
So even without LEAF, before LEAF, Oakville Green was a prodigious champion of tree planting thousands of trees a year in Oakville.
Yeah, still are.
What's your target for this year?
I think last year was our biggest one so far, and I think we planted about 4,000 last year. And we're planting, we're doing more restoration planting, so we're trying to take the green spaces that are not necessarily, don't need to be manicured lawn, and are maybe bordering onto a bit of a forest land or a natural area, and extend those so that we're getting that kind of naturalization moving into those areas. So we do more of that kind of tree planting when we're planting with the community and schools and volunteers. And this year we're definitely on target for probably 5,000 or so, but
Awesome.
smaller things. Yeah, so we're planting like the 1 gallon and 2 gallon things that we hope will grow up into our future urban forest.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about restoration, does that have a catchy name? Is that tree tenders, or is tree tenders something else?
So tree tenders is another additional opportunity. It's more of a training course. This is sort of taking your volunteer who wants to do a little bit more and having the skills and knowledge so that they can do even more in the community. And again, the tree tenders is a training program in collaboration with LEAF. I think we have 4 sessions coming up in Oakville. It's a 4-part course. There's a small fee, again that's subsidized, and you sort of leave being like a community arborist. So you're trained to do a little bit more than the average volunteer and understand a bit more of what the challenges are, why biodiversity is important, what sort of how soils and climate and all those things are related with tree health and care.
So this is going to allow, if you take the course, you're in a position to be a fountain of advice to your neighbors. Right?
Exactly, and then we hope you stay on and keep and come out to the kinds of stewardship events that we then host later on and work with us on removing invasives and watering street trees and mulching properly and those kinds of things that we're involved in, yeah.
Okay. Now, I think everybody was alarmed when we started hearing about bees dying off, because pollination is so important for so much of nature. And I've been reading in the last 12 months, they're back, they're not back. It's starting to look a little confusing. Do you have any, what's the latest on pollination? And is there a pollination crisis, or is there not a pollination crisis? Cathy?
If I could address that one, yeah. There most definitely is a pollination crisis. I think people, a lot of what you're hearing on the news is about the honeybee, which is a European species. The European honeybee is what is used to commercially pollinate all the agricultural crops. That is certainly being impacted by a whole plethora of problems, which are still being sorted out through research. We know that neonicotinoid pesticides is being one of the causes, but it's much more than that. But the bigger issue is what's happening to our wild bee populations. We have about 400 species of native wild bees in northeastern Canada. They're losing habitat. They don't have large areas, that is, they forage quite locally, and they need the right kinds of plants and soil conditions in order to nest. So there's a whole diversity of them. And we're seeing quite a large drop in their numbers. And that has greater impacts in terms of all the things that they support.
When we talk about native bees or wild bees, is that separate and distinct from what I think of as wasps?
Well, wasps are part of it. It's all in this they're called Hymenoptera is the technical term.
I love the way the Latin phrases roll off your tongue.
And within that, there are many genera or genuses, family groups of bees and wasps. So wasp is one sort of collection that's
but
in
separate from, when we're talking about bees, we're not necessarily talking about wasps.
We're talking about the whole group.
Oh, okay.
The whole group, because if you start looking at them individually, the line gets quite blurry as to what looks like a wasp and what looks like a bee. I think people would be quite surprised. And then even you move from Hymenoptera to Diptera, the flies. Some of the bee flies look very similar to bees. And so the diversity is fantastic. And as people start to observe what's happening in their gardens, I think they'll be delighted. And wasps are not things that people need to be afraid of. Most of them are extremely harmless, and a lot of them are doing very important things. A lot of them are predators. They're hunting little pests that are in your garden. And in fact, one of the things to deal with EAB and some of the very serious pests is introduction of these little parasitic wasps. Very tiny. You wouldn't even notice them in your backyard. But they they're serving incredibly important functions. And
Do
so
they go after the emerald ash tree borer?
there are some they're testing to see, and they may be releasing some of those to try and control these populations. And they've released pests to control all little parasitic wasps to control other serious
Well,
problems.
we had out our kitchen window the most extraordinary thing last year. It seemed like overnight, from nothing, what appeared to my eye to be big black wasps built a gigantic nest, I guess it is. It looked like a giant beach ball.
That would be probably a bald-faced wasp, yes.
That was, I mean, it was amazing how big it was. It was amazing how fast it happened. And we had somebody move it. And the next thing I knew, they had rebuilt in the top of our maple tree, like at the very top.
Where they're not bothering anybody and they're doing important jobs. But we do need to allow spaces for bees to nest and live. They're doing a lot for us, even though you don't think about it.
What might the bald-faced, if I say that right, wasp have been? What's their target?
I think it's often a predatory wasp, so it may be hunting other species. I'm not an expert on the bald-faced wasp, but I would guess that they're probably, Mara, you may know more than I. I'm not an entomologist, that's not my area of specialty, but I think that they are essentially a hunter and going after.
So every
pest
time
species.
something happens in my garden, I really should be going to the library.
And looking at, and really it's joyful to learn about all of these creatures and the wonderful web of life that's in our backyards. And by planting more species, more diversity of flowers, we support that life, and that supports an abundance of other life. What we're seeing, I read in The Guardian, for instance, this morning, they're seeing that farmland birds are declining 56% in France. Great Britain is seeing the same thing. We're looking across Canada, and our insectivores have dropped off 96%.
So these are what kind of birds?
Birds that eat insects. They're simply disappearing. And that's because we're losing a lot of this diversity, bees being one portion of that.
Are the insects passing poison into the bird population or something?
There are just not enough of them. We've eliminated so many insects in our environment through our agricultural practice, through our home gardens, which are lovely, but the lawn and the few shrubberies isn't supporting a lot of these native
So we
species.
should shoo the insect instead of swatting the insect?
Shoo the insect, yes, definitely. Learn to live with them more. Learn to appreciate their beauty and the important things that they're doing. It takes a chickadee 350 caterpillars a day to raise a nest of chickadees. So if you want to see chickadees in your garden, you have to allow the caterpillars to live. 9,000 caterpillars are required for it to raise a brood from beginning to end.
Wow.
So where are those caterpillars going to go if we're out there spraying and removing all of these insects from
Well,
our
we don't
garden?
spray
But
at Burton House, but I tell you, I've never seen 9,000 caterpillars.
but because we're not looking, but they're there. They're up in the canopies of the trees, and those trees support a great diversity of wildlife and native species more than exotic. So the research tells us that there are at least twice as many sort of species associated with our native trees. And in fact, work by Doug Tallamy, he's an entomologist from the Delaware University in the United States. He's found that native species support 10 times more of these moths and butterflies than non-native species do.
So the big trees in my yard are bird delicatessens in grocery stores.
They are
native trees,
incredibly
they are,
important,
yeah.
yes. And in fact, those bird species simply cannot exist without them.
How do we find out, let's say at home we're going, gee, I want to make sure I have native species in my garden, trees and plants and flowers. Is there a handy place to go to check, to see?
Well,
There are plenty of online resources out there. It's really great in the last few years, especially. A quick search, there's Go Botany is an online resource.
What's it called?
It's called Go Botany.
Go Botany.
Yeah, and if you search that, that's a great one. It's based in Michigan, but that's close enough to us, and it does give you a range map of that includes Canada as well, and it tells you, it can help you ID what species you have if you don't know it, and then it does tell you where it's native to. Another one is VASCAN, it's called, and that's a Canadian database where you can also search species, and it'll tell you not so much specific to Halton, but at least specific to general regions.
The Forest Gene Conservation Network, FGCN, has a website, and you can click on their map, and it will pull up a list of the species that are native to your region. And they also have a planting guide, landscaper's planting guide, and it will tell you if you've got sand or clay and sun or shade, which species you can grow there. So that's one of the best resources. Evergreen has a fantastic native plant database now, and again, you can put in your area, your sun conditions, some of your preferences, and it will pull up for you a whole list of what you can plant.
So would that be evergreen dot?
Evergreen, I should know that. I think it's .ca, evergreen.ca.
So we're going to plump for Canada here, and we're going to assume it's evergreen.ca. But of course, there's always Dr. Google.
Well, that's it. Evergreen will just bring up their database, and it will come.
We have, I'll put a plug in for we have a native tree, shrub, and pollinator garden sale, which is now on our website. So that store is online, and all of those trees, you can be assured, are not just Ontario natives, but they're Halton natives. So they're what you would have found here and what's appropriate for here. And so that's on till April 30th.
And that's because of the planting period, right?
Yeah, we take pre-orders. It's easier for us to sort of take pre-orders, understand what people already need, and then we can go to local native plant nurseries and fill those orders for people, because they're not finding native plants in nurseries is still tricky. They're not widely in demand. So if you want to promote that kind of thing, if you want to support backyard biodiversity, we should be asking our native, our local department stores and places where we're getting trees to stock natives.
Geez, we should get the nursery owners on the show and ask them to do more about promoting native species, I guess.
A lot of municipalities are growing their own. They grow native species because they are trying to reach their municipal tree planting targets, their restoration targets. They have their own native plant nurseries in municipal greenhouses, and then they connect in with schools and community groups and businesses. And
yes, Wellington County has a great example of that program that they've employed.
I know that as long as I've lived here, the Oakville Forestry Department has had a list of native species. In fact, when you need to plant a tree for some reason, I had to do it once, like 25 years ago, and they gave me a list and said, you can have any tree you want as long as it's on this list.
Right. No, and they do. They try very hard to figure out which trees are being most successful. I think we don't all want to plant the same thing. Diversity is key. We've learned with the emerald ash borer that if everybody has ash trees, and a disease or a pest comes through, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah, we had a thing for ash trees at one point. Chris Mark said that because it grew so fast and gave such a good canopy that there was a tendency to prefer it.
absolutely, yeah.
And
Yes,
to the point where it's like 10% of our trees or something.
we did the same thing with elm trees many years back, and then Dutch elm disease came in and again devastated. So we've seen this before. We've learned our lesson. I think forestry has a fantastic management plan, which is looking at diversification of our canopy, and homeowners can do that too by just looking what's around and maybe planting something a little bit different in their backyards.
And don't we have an oak forest at, on Joshua Creek, the Iroquois Shore Forest there? When we had the oak dieback issue several years ago, I was startled when it appeared anyway that this was a predominantly oak forest, and I didn't think we had any of that left.
We have, oak is it's substantial in many of our woodlands. Along Joshua Creek, we also have a maple beech forest, and so there are communities of trees that are grown, and the town will work to interplant as species are facing difficulties. For the homeowner, I think you have a lot more to choose from. If you want to support moths and butterflies, the top 3 from Doug Tallamy's research would be to plant something that's one of the oaks, and there are 6 native oaks. You could plant something in the plum family or the cherry family or a willow. Those are the sort of the top 3. They support the most diversity of species.
What would be number 1, 2, 3 on that list?
It would be oak, cherry,
Plum.
Willow, yeah.
Oh,
oak, cherry,
oak.
willow. Those 3
Oak,
genera.
the fruit, and the willow.
Yes.
And willow's like way faster growing, right?
Right. But when you think of willows, I think people probably think of the big weeping willow that you see. We have a dozen willows, some of them no higher than this.
What about poplar? Is there a native poplar?
Many native poplars, and poplars are very fast growing.
Right.
And again, there are also introduced poplars. So
So you have to be careful?
Well, you just need to ask the question, and just try, if you have the choice, to select a native species, and it will, again, just do more services for wildlife and for sort of the growing concerns in terms of pollinators and species across
Is there a
the country.
bird that's most at risk or under threat that we should try to support the most?
Well, I think here in Oakville there is some people trying to support the chimney swifts. I think that's a species that is gravely endangered. I think the numbers are maybe down as much as 96%, but I'm not positive. And I think purple martins, that kind of thing, again, anything that is entirely dependent on insects is in serious trouble.
Whenever I get bit by a mosquito, I pray for a purple martin.
A purple martin, some bats, all those lovely things that you can put up bat houses, put up bird houses in your backyard while you're planting these trees. And honestly, it makes your backyards, your spaces, just more delightful to have butterflies coming through, to have, I wish we could put up some of the pictures of some of the bees that are around. Some of them are little works of art, and people can just go in their backyards and start looking around at these fantastic creatures. You don't need to go to a museum. You can have it in your backyard.
Well, there you go, Oakville. You can have it all. You can have the green town and the happy life. All you got to do is get out in the garden and plant native species and support native species. Thanks very much for being with us on Oakville Matters. See you again next time.